All right, and I'm going to welcome everybody then again to Designing World-Changing Thinking Opportunities in Intermediate Geography with Maria Vimbalis from the Critical Thinking Consortium. I always love hearing folks from the Critical Thinking Consortium because they just have such a neat way of helping us help our kids see the world as critical thinkers, obviously, but just in really cool ways that I always come away with good ideas for the classroom. And I know it's been quite a few years since I first saw somebody. I think Garfield was the first person I saw from the TCT, and I walked away with like just tons of ideas and have been using them in the classroom ever since. So I know we're in for a treat tonight with Maria. So having said that, Maria, I believe I will throw it to you, and you can just simply ask me whenever you need anything, and I will help you as best I can.
Thank you so much, Colin, and welcome to everybody who's here tonight. Thank you for joining me here on Thursday evening. I imagine a lot of you have had a long school day, so I really appreciate the dedication of the teachers who are here. Just a little bit about me. I have been teaching for over 16 years, and one of the subject areas that I've taught has been grade 7 and 8 geography, and I've been doing that work for over a decade. And about 4 years ago, I started my work with the Critical Thinking Consortium, although the reason I wanted to work with TC2 is because of the difference that the Critical Thinking Framework had made in my own classroom over the years. So it was an exciting opportunity for me to continue to deepen my understanding of the framework. And 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to develop an inquiry pack, a unit for the organization for one of the new grade 7 geography, for the new grade 7 geography curriculum, the unit on physical geography. So that was a great experience and allowed me to really dive deeply into the new curriculum. And in some ways, some of the new curriculum I felt caught up with some of the approaches and things that I thought were really important in geography. So I'm excited to share that with you tonight. I'd love to get a sense of who's here tonight has participated in a workshop with the Critical Thinking Consortium before. So if you have, again, if you want to use your tool to check yes, and if not to check no, that would be great. Okay, great. So we've got a number of people, this is their first time in introducing the framework. And for those of you who have familiarized yourself with the framework, I hope that seeing it within the geography context is going to give you some more ideas and continue to deepen your own engagement with it. I'd love to have a sense of what people are teaching. So in the chat box, if you just want to share right now, are you teaching grade 7, 8 geography? If you just want to let us know, perhaps maybe even a unit that you're currently teaching or about to start, just so we have a sense of where everyone is at. And as people are doing that, I did want to share a little bit, a little more about my background, because in addition to teaching, something that I have done in the last decade that has really shaped my perspective and why I'm offering the world-changing classroom is that for 2 years I was away from teaching and working with War Child Canada as youth programs director. So some of you may be familiar with Dr. Samantha Nutt and her work. And during that time, I was working closely with youth and educators and developing resources and conferences for young people and engagement opportunities around global issues. And I had the experience while I was there to be able to travel to both Ethiopia and Uganda and work with some of our partner organizations there who are doing incredibly important on-the-ground work. In Ethiopia, it was supporting young people who had lost both of their parents to HIV/AIDS and were now responsible for their siblings. So I met young people who were about 14 years old up to 18 years old who might have had the responsibility for 2 to 4 siblings. And in Uganda, the project we were working on there was with young women who unfortunately had been victims of rape during conflict. And those were really transformative experiences for me in terms of developing my understanding of global citizenship and our interconnectedness, and it was something I was committed to when I came to the organization, but actually having that experience firsthand was something that changed my perspective and deepened my perspective. And I always have committed myself that since those experiences that I would continue to bring that to life as much as I could in framing the kinds of learning opportunities where we can really understand what connects us, how we're implicated in what happens in our world, and how we can continue to work for a more just and sustainable world. This is just if people are tweeting, this is my Twitter handle and Critical Thinking Consortium's Twitter handle, so if you want to tweet out tonight. Also my email address, which I will give you later as well, and the TC2 website. But I do like to give that information up front again because some people do really appreciate tweeting. I'm wondering if you could use your writing tool, write directly on the slide if you're comfortable, and if not, then please feel free to write it in the chat box. I want you to think about this question: what is the most impactful way that you nurture active citizenship in your students? Excellent. Being an active citizenship yourself. It's really important to model that. Sharing current global issues. Staying up to date with current events, getting students involved in their local communities, investigating topics related to social justice that are of interest. Excellent, fantastic. We've got a group of committed social justice educators here. I love it. Fantastic. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna move on. I hope everyone's had a chance to share some of the ways they nurture active citizenship. So we have a couple of questions we're going to dive into tonight, and this is our overarching question. How do we inspire and nurture students in becoming engaged students through geographic inquiry? And I've got 4 pictures here of 4 young people who I think are incredible role models in different ways, and I love sharing these young people's stories with my students. Alex Lortz started at a very young age. He started his organization, Kids versus Global Warming, when he was very young, and now he's in his early 20s, and he's developed the I Matter movement, which is an app that connects students and gets them engaged in issues relating to global warming. He feels that his generation is the last generation to be born into a world that values short-term greed, and that they're going to be leading the way to a more sustainable world that is possible. So he's a very inspiring young person. They actually, he has been leading a group of young people across the United States to sue their government for inaction, saying that it threatens their generation. Charmaine Moyo, she's now in her late 20s, but she started very young, quite inspired by Wangari Maathai. She almost single-handedly was a catalyst to start recycling in certain communities in Zimbabwe because they had no recycling program. So she is an example of perseverance in action. Boyan Slat is a Dutch inventor and the founder of the Ocean Cleanup, which actually will be launching, I believe, this year off the coast of Japan. And he started at about 14 years old, and he's been using advanced technology trying to rid the world's oceans of plastic. He was recognized as one of the 20 most promising young entrepreneurs worldwide, and he's the youngest ever recipient of the UN's highest environmental accolade, which is Champion of the Earth. And Takaya Blaney is from the Tla'amin First Nations here in Canada at Salish in BC. She's a singer and an activist, and she's traveled the world. She's a youth ambassador for Native children's survival, and she speaks very much about the importance of her culture and her people and the role that Indigenous wisdom can play in helping us return to a more sustainable way of life. So I think about these young people, and they inspire so much hope. And we in our classrooms have students who we know are capable of great promise and potential and to be world shapers and world changers. So I'd like you to take a moment right now and write your initial thoughts to this question. How do I effectively design my task to engage students in opportunities to think like a geographer? Okay, so just create a thought space. It could be on your computer right now. It could be a piece of paper. Just take a moment and think about, how do I effectively design my task to engage students in opportunities to think like a geographer? And let's add to that and be a world shaper. So we'll pull from our overarching inquiry, and to be a world shaper, a world changer. And maybe if we can just get the timer for about 2 minutes, Colin, if that's possible, just for people to take that time right now and give your initial thoughts to this question.
All right, we got 2 minutes counting down. Okay, so just the last few seconds to wrap up your thinking. I want to point out the back of the slide. This image that you see is from Alexander von Humboldt's thought book. So Alexander von Humboldt was a Prussian naturalist, explorer, and geographer, and a wonderful book was actually released last year. The Invention of Nature. And I'm just bringing this forward because it's a great read for those of us who are interested in the connections between geography and science. He actually was one of the first people who developed the conception of climate zones. He traveled the world. He synthesized knowledge from many different fields to form a vision of nature as
one interconnected whole. He influenced Darwin and Thoreau through his writing, and so he's sort of coming back now. And he predicted at the advent of the Industrial Revolution, he actually predicted some of the impacts of climate change that we're now facing. So I want to bring that forward just for yourselves as, as educators. It might be an interesting read for you. I'm going to give us a little critical challenge that we're going to work on through the course of this webinar. By the end of this webinar, I want you to determine 3 of the most powerful instructional choices you can make to nurture active citizenship through geographic inquiry. Okay, so by the end, I'm hoping you have 3 really powerful instructional choices of the many, and think about which ones for you would consider most powerful. What's really interesting and great about the new curriculum is that embedded within it is the Citizenship Education Framework. And this framework is what really gives us a foundation to address these core issues that I know many were mentioning around social justice, around active and engaged citizenship. So we've got this profound opportunity to move beyond maps, not beyond maps, because maps are amazing, but to move the discipline of geography really into the terrain of the data, the questioning, the issues that really bring our world to life for our students and give them powerful entry points for engaging in that world. So here's some of the principles that are in the Citizenship Education Framework. And I'd like you to look at this list and think about 3 that you would like to intentionally nurture. Because when we think of the continuum from K all the way up to 12, we're not going to necessarily be able to do all of these in our one unit or one class. But I'd like us to think about 3 that you want to really intentionally focus on, perhaps in the current unit that you're doing, perhaps in the context of the particular class or other school initiatives. So just look at this list and think of the 3 that really resonate for you that you'd like to really tackle and really explore with your students. Okay, maybe you want to make a note of that in your own thought space right now. Okay, and Colin's placed a link to that in case you, as we move on, in case you wanted to consider that further. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at this prompt. And I'd like you, given the criteria that I've got listed at the bottom, the criteria for a sustainable response, I'd like you to rank these proposed responses from most sustainable to least sustainable based on just your initial thinking right now. And if you want to place that ranking in the chat box, that would be great. So just rank them in order. So if you think C is first, just write, C, D, A, and B. Don't worry about being wrong. Just use the criteria to guide your own thinking. There's not really a wrong answer here. Great. So what we've just engaged with here, and this is an example of a slide, an actual PowerPoint slide from the grade 7 inquiry pack unit that I developed. This is a task that we give students, but what we've just engaged with is a critical thinking challenge. And I want to share with you the definition of critical thinking that the Critical Thinking Consortium's developed. And for those not familiar with the consortium, and I noticed a number of you haven't participated in any of our sessions, we are a not-for-profit educational organization that over the last 30 years has formed partnerships with professors of education, teachers, principals, superintendents, people within our education system who have been grappling with, what is quality thinking? How do we explicitly teach thinking? So the definition I'm going to share with you is not the only definition of critical thinking. There's many definitions out there. But I have to say it's a very pedagogically useful definition. It helps us as educators make sense of critical thinking. So the consortium defines critical thinking as thinking through a problematic situation about what to believe or how to act, where the thinker makes a reasoned judgment that reflects the competent use of the intellectual tools for quality thinking. And we're going to dive into this and look at what these tools are. But if you notice in the slide, we've got a problematic situation. You had to make a decision. There wasn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, but there were answers that were more sound than others according to the criteria. So we had to use that criteria, and the introduction of that criteria formed a constraint that essentially forced you to make that judgment. So it's really helpful for us to start thinking about the way in which we frame our tasks and questions and how the introduction of criteria creates that opportunity to have to make the reasoned judgment. So when we are promoting thinking in our classrooms, this is really the foundation of the work across all subject areas and grade levels. We want to shape a climate that really supports quality thinking. We want to create as many opportunities for quality thinking to be developed and to emerge as possible. We want to build student capacity for quality thinking, and our guidance, we want that guidance, so the kind of assessment and conversations and feedback that we're giving students, we want that to be centered on nurturing quality thinking. And across the bottom, these 5 categories you see are the 5 intellectual tools that we employ whenever we are making a reasoned judgment. So we need to bring background knowledge. So obviously, in that slide, where I gave you the task, a number of you possess the adequate background knowledge to make that decision. If you're limited in your background knowledge, it's harder for you to make a reasoned judgment. We need the criteria for judgment, so you were given that criteria of sustainable and it was unpacked there for you. Because if I just put sustainable and not had the subcategories, and you might have some different characteristics in a different context for sustainable, but in this particular moment, those were the characteristics for sustainable. And that was guiding your decision making. If I just said sustainable, a number of people would have some different ideas of what that is, but it was directed. Thinking vocabulary, so I use the word like rank, or we use words like analyze, bias, observation, conclusion. Do our students know what these words mean? Thinking strategies, so how are we going to make our decision? So again, as educators, as post-secondary graduates, in this particular task that I gave you, we're pretty unconsciously competent, and our ability to rank, has been developed. But let's say some of our students, they might need a rating scale, for example, really break down each of those criteria and to rate each one. How effective is it? How fair is it? So that would be an example of a thinking strategy. But thinking strategies are anything that we use to help us decide in any context, like a pro-con chart or a Venn diagram, for example. And finally, the other intellectual tools that we bring to bear when we're thinking critically are certain habits of mind. These are things like perseverance, open-mindedness, respect for others, the ability to consider the opinions of others, attention to detail. These are some of just a few of many different habits of mind that we need in order to engage in thinking. And as we start to use these intellectual tools as a framework for our assessment, I think this also really supports us in triangulating the assessment data. Because now we have some things to look for. We can say, does a student have adequate background knowledge in this case? And then perhaps that's what they need. Another student might need something different. So I'm going to be offering a webinar as well on assessing thinking in geography on November 14th. So we'll be diving into that more deeply during that session. So right now I'd like to turn our attention to these questions. And I'd like you to look at the 3 types of questions here and just think about what defines each type of question. So what are the characteristics of a type 1 question? What are the characteristics of a type 2? And what are the characteristics of a type 3? And please feel free to write your thoughts in the chat box. Okay, so some people are talking about 1 being closed-ended, right or wrong answer. Type 1 is more knowledge or background. Second type, more personal opinion. And the third, more of the thinking. So this is what some people are writing in the chat box. I affectionately call, and I just want to say really clearly that these are not, this is not a categorization that type 1 and type 2 are bad questions and type 3 are good. It's just, I think it's helpful for us to understand the way in which we frame our questions so that when we are trying to engage students in deeper thinking, we have a better understanding of how to design the task to elicit that kind of thinking from students. Hand, heart, and head. That's great. I actually call type 1. Some of my colleagues at the consortium, I think I got this from them, where's Waldo questions, right? I mean, the answer exists. It's just a matter of looking it up or retrieving that information from somewhere, right? The type 2 are definitely personal opinion. There's no right or wrong. And type 3, these are more critical inquiry questions. There's not necessarily a right answer. Doesn't mean that all answers are good answers, though. Some answers are going to be more sound or more effective than others. These questions require some curiosity and investigation. They're not easy questions to just answer. You're going to have to consider multiple plausible options before you make your decision. And that's what distinguishes them as the critical thinking questions. So thanks everyone for your thinking on that. So, and again, this just reiterates what I was saying. I want you to just take a moment right now. Think about a specific topic you might be teaching in geography next week, or maybe next term if you're not teaching geography yet. And I want you to see if you can bump up the thinking around that content through a specific type 3 question. So I'll put this back up so you can see the different characteristics, looking at the characteristics of those type 3. Is it more helpful for me to put this slide up or some of the exemplars up? If it's this slide, just say current slide, and if it's the other slide of examples, just say examples. And I'm hoping there might be a clear consensus. If not, we might be in trouble. I'll maybe switch them up a little bit. Okay, so far current slide. Great. Okay, so just take a moment. Colin, again, maybe if we could just get about 90 seconds. I know that might not, maybe we'll get 2 minutes. We'll give 2 minutes here. I know that might not be enough time, but hopefully you can at least start the task and then continue it. And if you do come up with a question, please feel free to share it in the chat box. And halfway through, I will take us to the other slide. So I'll split it up. So when we have 1 more minute, I will give us the example questions again. I think I'm going to add, another couple of minutes here because no one has started typing and I don't want people to feel the time pressure. It's something I don't like doing, or we don't like doing to students in our class, so I don't want to do that to you here. So maybe we'll just keep the timer off for a little bit, and as people start filling in the chat, I'll know that we've people have had enough time. Okay, so Shazadi, think of ways that the landform near your home affects you and your activities in the community. Explain your ideas. So I think that's a great start. And what I want to just invite is to think about what's the criteria by which the students are going to decide about how the landform affects them and the activity. So is there some criteria? For example, could it be to determine the 3 most significant ways the landform near your home affects you and the activities in your community? Because that might direct the students through that criteria again and really invite students to form a reasoned judgment. So I hope that makes sense. The use of the criteria is really at the heart of critical thinking. Critical comes from the Greek. We often think of it as critique, and it can certainly be that in certain contexts, but it actually comes from the word criterion, criterial-based thinking. Critical thinking is criterial-based thinking. Perfect, thank you. So Dave, the criteria in critical thinking, It's criterial-based thinking. So when we look at these type 3 questions that I have up here, notice, for example, the first example, the students will be making their assessments according to feasibility. So that is what is going to kind of force a reasoned judgment from them. And without the criteria, it's more difficult for students to have their own thinking focused. In the second example, the best action. So what's a best action? We're going to have to perhaps really clarify what that criteria is. In the third, the 3 most inspiring. That's the basis by which we're making the decision in that third question. Design an effective campaign. In the fourth, the most dramatic differences. And in the final, which features define our national identity. So there is like a most, which most defines, so character, like which one most defines our Canadian identity. So the criteria is so important to the invitation. We need the criteria to invite students into that kind of thinking. Oh, great. I'm glad that'll help. It's incredible what these tweaks to our questions, the kind of thinking that it invites in our students. And without that criteria, we sometimes end up giving students a sort of combination of, we want to do an inquiry question, but it can almost end up being like an opinion question, because they don't have anything by which to really frame and make the decision. So that, when we're talking about critical thinking, that is one of the key dimensions to it. Yes, thank you, Maria. It's that important, the fundamental importance of questioning. I think this is the foundation of what we do and how we frame our tasks. It's incredible how it transforms our classroom and what happens in our classroom. And that's really what we're going to continue to explore tonight. So again, people may, if you are working on your question, you want to share it a little bit later, please feel free. I wanted to come back after we talked about critical thinking, just to give you a moment. If you want to return to your thought space, you might want to still be working on your question a little bit. But if you have anything you want to add or revise to your thinking based on even the work we've just done to unpack what critical thinking is a little bit. So just take 1 minute. Oh, sorry, Jessica, I didn't. Let me go to your question. I apologize. Okay, which 2 community roles do you think contributed the most meaningfully to daily life in medieval village? Great, yes. Which 2 contributed most meaningfully? That's great. And then you can unpack with your students, what is a meaningful contribution, right? And you can, that's some rich learning there. Like, what is a meaningful contribution to a community? Great, thanks, Jessica. Okay, so hopefully people have had a chance to just add or revise to their thinking a little bit. Another really important dimension, this shift in the new curriculum, is it's really focusing on the disciplinary thinking. So it's organized according to the ways in which a geographer thinks, the 4 key ways. We know Gritzner, many of us are familiar with his key questions for framing a geographic inquiry, and I find this is really helpful when I'm asking my students to think like a geographer, is what is where, why there, why care. So let's say you are doing, and notice a number of you talked about having students look at issues in the newspaper, in the media around geographic issues. And here's a little invitation to them that when they're talking about what they are reading about, have them answer these questions. What is where, why there, why care? I also sometimes tweak that and have students ask, I ask students to share with a partner, and they have to identify the 3 most important geographic elements in their article and share those with their partner. So, and we continue to deepen our understanding of what that means as we go on. Again, little tweaks to invite deeper thinking. But the 4 key ways that we've been asked with the new curriculum is to really think in terms of patterns and trends, helping our students understand spatial significance, interrelationships, and geographic perspective. And I'm going to explore a couple of examples of this just so we can continue to make this more concrete of what does it mean to help our students see patterns and trends, interrelationships, spatial significance, and geographic perspective. So here's another example of a critical thinking task. So why is the climate changing? And we're going to ask students to consider which factor contributes the most to changing climate patterns. So when you look at this task, which of the 4 frames for thinking like a geographer do you think are most present in this challenge? So take a moment to consider that, and then please feel free to write that in the chat box. Okay, so interrelationships and patterns and trends. So patterns and trends. Yeah, absolutely, I think a case can be made for both of those. And again, just the ways in which we're surfacing and helping ourselves see these frames of geographic thinking and what we're doing. So here's another potential task is have students look at this map and suggest changes to the map that would more effectively communicate the need to respond to changing climate patterns. So getting students to perhaps annotate a map can be a really interesting exercise and share their suggestions. But when we're thinking about this task, again, which of the frames of geographic inquiry do you think is most prevalent? And it can be more than one, absolutely, as people were saying before. So, which 1 or 2 do you think are most highlighted in this particular task? So people are saying patterns and trends as well as spatial significance is coming in, as well as perspective. So again, these are the ways that we're trying to encourage students to engage in tasks that help them to think the way a geographer thinks. So these are 2 examples of helping and inviting them to that kind of geographic thinking. We know that when a student really understands something, whatever it is, whatever concept, whatever discipline, when we truly understand something, these are the things that a student is able to do with that understanding. And that's how we can distinguish. This is how we can distinguish between a surface understanding and the deep understanding. And think about that in our own learning. When we really genuinely understand something, we're able to do these things. We're able to assess something. We're able to use it. We're able to express it in a different way. We're able to transfer it in a new context. I know this is one of the things we really work on as educators is we have that moment where we feel like the students get something and then we want them to transfer in a different context. And sometimes we have this attrition along the way and we realize, oh my goodness, they don't have that deep understanding. It's really useful information for us. But this is where we want to be targeting our instruction and our assessment. This is what we're looking for. And we want to set up tasks that allow us to see this kind of competency in action for students. So again, just wanting to remind us that we're continuing to think about tonight, how do we inspire and nurture students in becoming engaged citizens through geographic inquiry? And I'm hoping that you're seeing in order to really be an engaged citizen, our students need to possess a deep understanding. So when we think about these 4 young people who are being world shapers and world changers, they are possessing a deep understanding. You can't develop a recycling program in Zimbabwe without a deep understanding of the issues and the interrelationships. You can't begin to design something which will clean the oceans of garbage without deep understandings. You can't sue the government without some really deep understandings of the core issues and the law. And you can't represent your culture through song without a deep understanding of the cultural tradition of that song. So we need deep understandings. And so to be an active and engaged citizen, and I think we see with what's happening in our world, some of the really alarming consequences when there's not a deep understanding and when there's not critical thinking, and the kinds of citizenship that surfaces without that. And so it's an awesome responsibility that we have as educators to nurture that kind of thinking and that kind of engagement in the world. So one of the things I've been working on over the last number of years is I've been trying to bring together, STEM and STEAM with the arts, and there's a new one now, STEAM, where you add humanities as well. But I've been working with design thinking and systems thinking and integrative thinking, and critical thinking is woven throughout, and trying to provide opportunities where connections are made with mathematics, with geography, and having students engage in inquiries where they are developing solutions to real-world problems. So the only criteria I gave students when I started this particular inquiry, and something I've called Solutions Lab, that we sort of brings together a space for, as I mentioned, geography, mathematics, humanities, is the only criteria I gave is that whatever you are wanting to think deeply about, and develop some kind of solution for, has to be engaged in making someone's life or the lives of others better in some way. So I didn't want people to be like developing gold-plated toothbrushes, for example. And using the Design Thinking for Educators, and Colin's placed the link there, IDEO, great resource, if you want to start dabbling with design thinking. And this emerged just after our first couple of forays with design thinking, where you can express your concern as either a complaint or a wish. So you could frame it as, I would love to see more sustainable technologies in our world. Or it could be a complaint. I'm frustrated by all the dire warnings about climate change. So they could frame it whichever way, as a wish or a complaint. And these are some of the questions that now obviously have to be honed down. But, students are really thinking about these issues. This comes from them. They're interested in, I have a student who loves the airline industry and he wants to be a pilot. And his question is, how might we create a clean and sustainable aviation industry? And we used appreciative inquiry, which is a way of framing questions. You'll notice the how might we, to frame in a positive way inquiry that takes us into the, it's just as its name sounds, affirmative inquiry. How might we achieve cleaner drinking water? So, you see that we're creating these opportunities for students to really become those world shapers. We're giving them time to think about things that really matter and that connect to the world. This is from the grade 7 Inquiry Pack unit, and this is the first day. So I called this Solutions Lab, Jennifer. This is from the first day of the grade 7 unit, and students have a thought book, and I asked them, this is the first thing I asked them, is what would you tell the world? Draft a message to the world that shares one key idea and one inspiring example to help us respond to our changing environment. Record your initial message in your thought space and share your message with a partner. So why I'm showing this is I also want you to reflect on the way I've tried to lead this session tonight, where we start with an inquiry and everyone has an opportunity to put their initial thoughts down. And as we continue to learn together, your thinking is going to change. It's going to deepen. And so giving students this opportunity to, rather than having what you want them to do saved for the end, you make the task the driver for the learning, not the product of the learning. It will be, because what I wanted them to do was craft a message to the world around the environment with 4 sustainable, inspiring responses that people are making, as well as 4 powerful ideas that have guided the way we've interacted with our environment. And by giving students that opportunity from day one, and then giving them multiple opportunities to come back, we are allowing them the space and time to revisit their thinking. My colleague Garfield Ginny Newman calls this failing forward. We're letting students muck about. We're letting them have those initial thoughts, and then as we learn, being able to change and revise and forming those deeper connections. So this would be an example of a launch, right? We launch the learning from day one. These are some examples, writing down their initial ideas, or ranking. If what we want them to ultimately do is rank a series of events or rank a series of responses, we get them doing initial rankings. And then as they learn more, we have them revisit and revise their thinking. And we nurture active citizenship by designing an effective overarching critical challenge. So a critical challenge is framed in a way that invites that kind of quality thinking, but it needs to be authentic. So the more authentic the overarching challenges that we give students, the more engaging it will be for students. So it stimulates life outside of school, has an audience beyond the teacher and the classroom. It requires students to demonstrate their learning through performance or creation of a product. So here's some examples of some authentic performance tasks. Thinking about your geography unit, and if you had students developing something along these lines. So in the case I gave you, it was, as I said, a message to the world. And that task, that message to the world that ultimately I wanted as the demonstration of learning, by the time we'd finished our inquiry, that was driving our learning. So now students have something meaningful. So as they're learning about, different climate zones, and as they're learning about different forms of vegetation and water systems, they have this overarching challenge of a message to the world that is creating a very powerful framework for them and an invitation to do the learning about all those things that I've mentioned. And we become more choreographers of the learning. right, through that inquiry. So we're assisting students, they're developing the thinking to be able to engage in that powerful message to the world as they're learning the core expectations of the geography curriculum. So I just wanted to see if there's any questions at this point, if everything is clear, any thoughts that people have at this point. Okay, so I'm taking a sign that we're good to go. Please feel free again to say if anything's unclear. So here's an example. We've got our overarching inquiry. And an overarching inquiry should really be a horizon question. It's something that is going to extend beyond their time with us. How should we respond to our changing Earth? Students will be thinking about this beyond our classroom. It's out in the horizon. We know this generation will have this as something they've got to respond to. And yes, there will be some slides available after the webinar. And their challenge, their critical challenge, this task that's given right up front is to create a compelling multimedia message to the world to communicate powerful ideas and inspiring examples that will help us respond sustainably to our changing Earth. So that is introduced up front. And so in the first day, this is another example of part of the launch on the first day. In this unit, students, or in this inquiry, students are invited to watch the video of this young activist who was speaking at a Bioneers conference. And as they're watching this, they're thinking of reasons to support his claim where he says there's no better time to be born than now. And students need to watch this video with a purpose to decide if they agree. But notice as well that the launch is an example of a multimedia message to the world. So they're also getting an invitation into the kind of task that they'll be doing and having an opportunity to potentially assess it and think about it. So we're going to take, I was going to show this, but I'm conscious of the time, and it's very easy to watch after, and I don't think it'll take away. So I know that Colin will place the link there, and it'll be available after, but please feel free to take a look at this video, and you can see, what students are invited into and to think about from the first day. And again, they're also invited to not only think about his claim, but they are also invited at a certain point to think about whether it was a compelling message and what would have strengthened his message. And what's interesting is a number of the students will surface that, it was very compelling, but what was missing or what could have been stronger was some of the geographic evidence that would have supported some of the claims that he was making. So, and to see students start to get that and be able to recognize the importance and the power of the geographic evidence is a theme that can run through that. So an overarching inquiry, we want to frame an important issue or concept that students will take away as that invitation to inquire. And the difference between learning information about a topic versus critical inquiry. There's some really important differences as we frame powerful inquiry tasks, and we know that this new curriculum really is an inquiry-based curriculum. But I would argue that, critical inquiry and scaffolding students in those intellectual tools is so important, because without that, I think the students can get quite anxious. They're given an inquiry, it's so broad. How are they being scaffolded to do the kind of learning and thinking? They really do need that kind of support to develop their ideas and to develop their understandings, right? So they need to learn how to reach their own reasoned conclusions. They need to learn we have to teach them how to interpret and assess information. We need to teach them how to question data and information that they find. Another example of an overarching inquiry for grade 8, for example. How do we create sustainable communities for large numbers of people to inhabit? And the critical challenge, an example of a critical challenge, design an effective response to an issue that highlights the interaction of human settlement and the environment. And last year when I engaged my students, there's some really incredible, powerful designs that emerged. This is one student, she researched flooding in India. So this was her inquiry, put her there to focus on that. Yes, I'll go back to the last slide, sorry. So design an effective response. This was their challenge. Design an effective response to an issue that highlights the interaction of human settlement and the environment. And so what you saw, the student, her inquiry was really focused on drought in India, and she researched. It was fantastic, and started to think as a systems thinker because she researched some of the issues that emerged in the humanitarian responses. And what she found was she looked at the kind of temporary shelters that were built, and she concluded that one of the key issues was that when people were displaced, they lost their community in the process, and that affected their ability to be resilient after a natural disaster. So she looked at 3 different models of temporary shelters and took the best, so here's the critical thinking, took the best elements from each of them and then creatively combined them into a whole new structure that allowed people to actually live in an area longer before their homes could be rebuilt or they had to relocate completely, and that they could be there longer and form community to help them to emerge. So the kind of thinking that the student was doing, and this was scaffolded along the way, right? So we were learning how to assess credible information. We were learning how to use the criteria to make the decisions. We were learning about the habits of mind of an innovator around creatively combining as we study different solutions. So, you know, this is just an example of the kind of world-changing opportunity you see of pushing students, you know, beyond. Like, this is so much richer than, you know, our traditional unit test, for example, right? When we're having students really engage. And we invited members of the public in to hear the students as they spoke about the issues they had learned about, as well as some of their solutions to these issues or their presentation of existing solutions that they had deemed most sustainable, because it's also differentiated in that way. So students who are really ready to take on that kind of design, and students who, you know, what's really powerful for them is to be given a couple of options and decide, you know, a judge of the better or best, which of these is most sustainable, is still a really powerful invitation to thinking. Another potential overarching inquiry for a part of a unit. I hesitate to call units because I really, you know, I don't think in terms of units. I want us to think in terms of the interconnections in the inquiry. How can we accurately yet creatively map environmental change caused by human impact to stimulate action on the environment? And the challenge here is to create a compelling map that also doubles as an artistic representation highlighting the 4 most significant challenges and opportunities created by environmental change. And by the way, if people do want to email me afterwards and talk about even more of some of the nuts and bolts, or if I can support you in some way, please don't hesitate to be in touch with me, and I can, you know, continue to share some things outside of this session. So here's an example of, you know, a student who's, you see a map. This is Botswana, but it's also an artistic representation. But there's also tremendous thinking. Students thought about and researched ways that Indigenous communities have lived in relation to the land and pulled out the powerful ideas that have emerged from that long-term relationship with the land. right? Or, again, the students here are sharing some of their designs in some initial stages, getting some feedback, right? Or here's another representation. And you see, again, the annotations, I think, and you can't read what it says, but you can see through this the kind of the depth of thinking that is happening in annotating in this way, not just places, but relationships and pulling out powerful ideas. I'm so glad you're going to take this on. That's amazing. It's pretty fantastic. So I want to give you a moment right now because this is our challenge for the night, and we're getting, the time has really flown by for me. I don't know what it's been like for you, but I want you to take a moment right now and think about if you have 3 powerful instructional choices of the ones you presented that you can make to nurture active citizenship through geographic inquiry. So just take a moment to note that. So I want to go back. I want to just show you something, just in terms of engagement. And I do hope people come to the November 14th if you can make, because we will continue to delve into this. I feel like in some ways we're just sort of scratching the surface, of where we can go. But let's say, this is the first day, and I want to show you an example of what a student wrote on that day. And like this, so this is day 1, and you're going to read something, and well, I won't say too much, but then I want to talk about where the student moved by the end of the inquiry. Okay, so this is the message on the first day. So what would you tell the world? Now, I think that we can all acknowledge that if this were the final message after all the learning, we'd feel really disappointed. There's not a lot here of demonstration of learning, but this is the first day. And I want us to take a moment and look at engagement for a moment. Okay, look at the taxonomy of engagement. So at the consortium, we've developed this taxonomy of engagement to help us really, again, understand where we're aiming our instruction. So at the bottom level, a student is merely complying. They're on task. They're just doing what we've told them to do. Sometimes they're interested and somewhat entertained in what we've asked them to do. At times, we can see that they care. They might appreciate the value. Sometimes in grade 8, we have students who are making applications to optional attendance high schools, and sometimes that's the motivator, or there's some kind of, some reason a student is seeing the value of what they're learning. But the most powerful places of engagement, and we see this in our own lives, is when we're really challenged and caught up in something. Like when I get caught up in a good Sudoku puzzle, like I'm really challenged and I'm caught up and so much can be going on, but I have to solve that Sudoku. Or we're transformed, we're empowered. We've been changed by what we have learned, by what we have engaged in. And I know that's where we want to aim our instruction. And we can't really get to that level of engagement, I would say, without inviting students into critical, collaborative, and creative thinking. So when we look at that first day, I want you to think about where on this taxonomy, what level of engagement, where would you rank this student on the taxonomy? And please feel free to write it in the chat box. Okay, so cares, interested. So what I want to show you is I'm not able to show you their messages because these were like 10 to 15 minutes long, and I'm not able to show that in this context. You know, and for various reasons, I don't want that on the you know, on the recording. I do have permission from parents to share in certain contexts, but what I do want to share with you is some thoughts of this same student, a reflection on their experience. Okay, so I'm not able to show you their actual messages, which were pretty fantastic, but I want to show you the reflection on the learning, and then I'd like you to again consider the engagement level. Okay, so yes, this is the same student. This is the same student. What was fascinating, and this is why I'm so excited to share the framework with you, because as an educator, you know, I work with the consortium part of the time, and part of the time I'm in the classroom in a collaborative teaching model. And the transformation that I've seen in students has been so inspiring. On the first day, I did a blind poll and I asked students, I had them put their heads down, and I asked them, how many of you feel that you have a role to play in, you know, in the environment and in helping to deal with some of the environmental challenges, which a number of them are aware at a surface level, as we saw in that first reflection. And the students, maybe there were a handful who said they felt that they had some contribution to make. And I asked the same question at the end of this inquiry, and every single student raised their hand. And, you know, I had tears in my eyes, because, you know, for me, that is what it's about. You know, is to help nurture that capacity in young people and nurture that kind of citizenship and help them understand the world and their place in the world. And I do think that really engaging them in quality thinking and engaging learning opportunities just supports us so much in that endeavor. I'm not sure that we can really do it otherwise. I want to also give you an example of a student's thought book. So I mentioned that we started our thought book, and, you know, as we were collecting, you can see just the kind of connections that a student is starting to make, you know, and dating their contributions into their thought book. So the thought book, and we're just releasing a quick guide. It's about $10, all about the way in which to use a thought book. But, you know, I showed you Humboldt's thought book at the beginning, and here's an individual who's made these great contributions and was able to see connections. And we need to provide more opportunities for students to make connections between what they're learning. That, so we have to think about how are we supporting the integration of knowledge? This is a really useful and powerful tool for us to help support that process of reflection and integration and connection making. And that's why having a really powerful inquiry that we sustain really supports that kind of thinking as well. So again, here's another simple task of, we've got these proposed responses to climate change and students need to rank them, and we're using that criteria. So notice that if at the end of the inquiry they're creating a powerful message to the world that highlights the most sustainable, inspiring responses, look at how this is helping support their deep understanding of the criteria. So as they're considering different options, they're starting to think, well, is that effective? Is that realistic? Is that fair? And it's amazing to hear their discussions. Which I say, well, this is a very realistic response, but it's not particularly fair, because the burden is then falling on those without a lot of resources to address the problem. And students are actually having these kinds of conversations because they're being taught explicitly the intellectual tools that support that kind of thinking. Right? Helping them develop the vocabulary of thinking. Do they know the difference between evidence or a conclusion? So decide which column lists evidence, which column lists conclusions. And again, inviting thinking. We could just give them a sheet that has, this is evidence, these are examples of conclusion. But again, the one who's doing the thinking is the one who's doing the learning. So we can tweak even the teaching of content. We're teaching content, but students are thinking through the content. And as a result, the learning is happening at, hopefully it is happening at a deeper level. Right? And then we can give the definition after we've done some initial grappling. And then we can invite students to revise and think, okay, so how was that? Where now revisit that chart, which is evidence, which is a conclusion, or how close was your definition? Would you tweak these definitions a little bit? Simple tasks, like you've got students reading part of a textbook or a handout that you've given them with some background knowledge. Even this can be made into a thinking task with a simple prompt to highlight the most useful pieces of geographic evidence. And just talk with them about, what's a useful piece of geographic evidence? You might say, well, it's relevant to what I'm looking at. It has, it has credibility, right? So you have students, a simple task, but you bump up the thinking. Yes, students being taught how to think, exactly. Helping them understand what counts as evidence. How do we gather evidence? Well, we gather it through research, through observation, through experiments. And then as you're going through the unit, they're collecting evidence because you're looking at maps and you're saying, hey, is that some geographic evidence you could use in your message to the world? How about the drawings or this part? And you have students who say, well, I found this fantastic graph that's really showing the impact of climate change. And this is really strong evidence that I can include in my message. Or again, showing a little video. This one is a great one from Eco Tipping Points. And you've got students viewing a video, but think about how often, what do we do when we view a video? Well, sometimes we just have students watch the video, or sometimes we have a fill in the blank to make sure they're, quote, I'm going to put it on quotes, on task. But I want you to look at what they've been invited to here. Identify examples of the geographic evidence used to support the conclusion shown above. So they're thinking through the video. So we're not losing these precious opportunities for students to be gaining deeper understanding. We're getting them thinking at every opportunity. Right? Helping them distinguish between geographic facts and geographic evidence. And then inviting them, in this case, to decide which caption makes the photo. So a lot of these slides that I'm showing you, they do come from the grade 7 inquiry pack. And I'm sharing them because they can be a model for what you're going to do in your class. But I did spend a year sort of really having to think through this. So it can be a potentially useful resource. And we have inquiry packs for a number of the units of the revised curriculum. People might want to take a look at. You can even, what's available online currently for free is the whole synopsis. You can see the scaffolding, the launch lesson, and the first lesson. So all of that is available for free, and that can help support your own thinking about how to frame a unit. So again, we've got our initial task. Well, this time we're asking students to think about what evidence might you use to support your conclusions. So this is that scaffolding that I've been referring to, scaffolding the learning, scaffolding those intellectual tools, scaffolding the kind of thinking. I don't want to see, like when we saw the day one, there wasn't a lot of geographic evidence. There was a lot of just, a bit of surface knowledge that the student was bringing forward. But, he cared, but he couldn't really speak with a lot of depth or power in that moment about those issues. But as they learn how to identify evidence and pick relevant pieces and powerful pieces of evidence, we're teaching them how to do that. Right? Or again, using images. Look carefully at the image. Which one is more recent? Which of the 4 aspects of the environment? Because we know in the grade 7, for example, the 4 aspects are a really powerful part of that curriculum. Of water, landforms, vegetation, and climate. So you can take a picture and turn it into a really powerful task by tweaking the question. And I've also given some examples. There's a number of links of different resources and places to get fantastic photographs. Like Edward Bertinsky has incredible photographs that you can use about the impact of human settlements on the environment for both grade 8 as well as for grade 7, geography. That connection between literacy that is across all subject areas. So, stepping into the picture, being able to infer, developing student capacity for inference. What would people be saying to each other? What would happen next? Would someone else enter the picture? What would they say or do? Construct a powerful caption for this image. So this, really relates with the grade 8 geography curriculum, and so much can cascade out of that. There's a film that the National Film Board released. It is an older film. It is probably almost, I think it's at least 2 decades old, if not more. It's called Who Gets In, but I still show it, and I frame that, I frame it as an inquiry, and we inquire as to how much has changed, but it's a really powerful video about immigration in our country, and also critically analyzes. I think we have a lot of stereotypes about how welcoming Canada's borders are, and this film critiques and helps us see this from a different perspective. So Who Gets In is a film that you may want to show parts of it and unpack that with your students. So we are in the last 5 minutes. I hope that you have at least 3 powerful instructional choices to help you nurture active citizenship through geographic inquiry. I did want to share, again, that the inquiry pack for grade 7 is there, and you can look at this and see a whole scaffolded sustained inquiry unit. You can look at the synopsis and perhaps get some ideas for different inquiries you want to do. You may choose to this unit is available for purchase. It includes everything: PowerPoint slides, all the background knowledge and briefing sheets, all the thinking strategy sheets, lesson notes, all of that's included. But just from what's available for free as well, you can really get a picture to help support your thinking around sustained inquiry. And we also have some powerful tools if you're a partner board with the Critical Thinking Consortium. So you can easily find it out by going to the website and seeing partners. And if you see your board there, you can register for an account and use your board email address if you're a partner, and that gives you access to over 80 tools for thought, as well as a number of other different resources that help you scaffold student learning. And that's a really amazing advantage of being a member, is access to those kinds of tools. And again, my contact information in case you didn't get it the first time. Hopefully you'll be wanting to send out some tweets, and please feel free again to email me or to tweet me at any point. And I hope to see a number of you on the 14th of November. So thank you so much for being a part of this session, and keep doing what you do.
Wow. Wow. I'm gonna invite everybody to give some applause here. I'm going to throw some over on the left-hand side from me. Jessica's added the thank you there as well. That was a wicked. Maria, I'm not a grade 7 geography teacher. I'm a secondary science teacher, but I'm just sitting here, my mind's just spinning around how to take issues-based thinking and bump it up, as you say, with a lot of those ideas. So I love the TC2 stuff because I got something out of this one as well. So it's awesome. So thank you so much from me and on behalf of everybody else. Just a couple of quick things before we sign off here, folks. One of the things that we do at the end of every one of these sessions is we request that you give us a bit of feedback. There's a link here on this slide that will open up in a browser and to a feedback form. When you actually sign out of Blackboard, it should automatically open up anyway, so you'll get it whether you click this link or not. Once you're done the survey, you'll get an option, as you can see below here. It gives you an option to print out a webinar certificate, the kind of thing you can add to a professional portfolio, that sort of thing. If you've got a TPA going on this year, it's the kind of thing that is very handy to have. So we do ask that you please take a few minutes and fill out that survey. Like I said, the link, if you don't click this one, the link will pop up when you sign out of Blackboard. Just a couple of things upcoming. There's always, as you guys now hopefully know, you know how much OTF puts on here. These are just things that are coming in the next few weeks. I'm going to highlight right there on the 14th, Maria's back with part 2 of this one. So if you haven't signed up for that one, I'd recommend it because I think it just can only get better from here. So you can always check on the OTF calendar to find out more of those as well. The money for AQs is still available for people, although I just got an email today that it's almost gone. So if you haven't applied or you're thinking about applying for some of this money for AQ courses, now is the time. And if you don't get it now, then there might be another shot later on to get on a waiting list. But that is there, and you can visit the website, the OTF website, to learn more about that. Just a quick more thing. There's always stuff going on the OTF website. They've got a conference on financial literacy coming up in a couple of weeks. You can check that out as well on the OTF website and register for that one as well. And last but not least, there's lots of places to connect with OTF through the web, Twitter, Facebook, and then a lot of the things are posted on YouTube as well. All of the information tonight, all the links and the recording to the session will be posted on a resource page that will be sent to you tomorrow at the email address that you used to sign up. So once again, thank everybody for coming. Thank Maria on behalf of everybody because it was a wonderful session, and I hope to see everybody again here sometime. So have yourselves a great evening, folks.